Look, Donald, we're facing an emergency. Humanity is facing an emergency. A fascist regime has seized the reins of power in the most powerful, actually the sole superpower in the world. Trump and Pence are operating out of Hitler's playbook, only they have nuclear weapons. And what RefuseFascism.org is saying to the world is that while it's beautiful, it's righteous that millions of people have stood up.
I am not an expert on Hitler, but my father is. He toured post-war Germany extensively in 1957 and 58 as a child performer, and he often recounts the stories. He befriended teenage Lebensborn children, and if you don't know what Lebensborn children are, well, before you post any more about Hitler, you should probably read about them. He visited an SS widow and got a peek at her husband's uniform and Luger, the one he committed suicide with, which he had stored in an old trunk in the attic. These and other intense experiences in Germany set my father on a lifelong quest to understand the sociopath, Hitler, and the country that allowed itself to be dragged into one of the darkest chapters in world history. My dad is a Hitler Nazi buff, the way Indiana Jones' dad was a Holy Grail buff. As the son of a man with this hobby, one might call it an obsession, I learned a lot about Hitler and the Third Reich just by osmosis growing up. My father would weave World War II stories into his sermons. He would talk about new books, and he was reading on the subject. When I was 9 years old, I bought him a book on the Battle of Stalingrad for Christmas. Not a tie or a pair of socks, a book on the Battle of Stalingrad. Yeah, it was kind of like that. The thing my father and I have often discussed through the years is the eye-rolling art of comparing American presidents to Hitler. It is such an absurdity we find it amusing and frustrating. It's often just a punchline, like the soup Nazi wasn't really a Nazi. He was just mean. The Nazi part makes it funny. You know, over the top, like grammar Nazi or spelling Nazi. Nobody is really a Nazi. It's our representation as something we consider jarring, strident, intractable, and inhumane. But the truth about Nazis isn't funny at all. It's bloody and horrible and gut-churning, and involves machine guns and butchery and inhumanity on a scale that takes your breath away. Nobody is really a soup Nazi, unless they served it in a concentration camp. The idea of comparing an American president to Hitler is just as absurd, from any angle, in any context. The American system itself pretty much prevents Hitlers from showing up, and America itself is an anathema to what Hitler was trying to create. An American anything or anyone is hard to fit into the Hitler model. It's just not apples to apples. There are some fundamental things to understand about Hitler. 1. He took over a small, failing state that didn't have separated government, enumerated powers, or checks and balances. It's difficult for a guy like that to show up here, in this system. 2. His entire political career was violent from the beginning. There was always death in his wake. He didn't suddenly just turn violent. It was a pattern, as it always is with sociopaths. This is the most important thing to watch, the violence. I always keep an eye on who is rioting, breaking things, throwing rocks and bombs. It doesn't make them Nazis, but it signals how far they're willing to go. He entered office with his own personal military construct, the SS, with allegiance to him only. They would carry out things that the regular military would never carry out, i.e., the murder of private citizens and political opponents. Nothing like that exists or could exist in America. We simply wouldn't allow it to. He didn't start out just killing Jews. He started out euthanizing people with special needs, for the betterment of the caregivers' lives. You can decide which side of the aisle favors the extermination of inconvenient people. He disarmed the population, then nationalized healthcare and education. 2 or 3 of those are Bernie Sanders moves. But guess what? Bernie isn't Hitler either. Not by a long shot. The list goes on, but the deal is this. Hitler was a real-life murdering sociopath. He wasn't just a charismatic speaker who incrementally fell into bad behavior. He wasn't just a racist corrupted by unfettered power. In other words, you or I probably couldn't end up being Hitler. A garden variety KKK leader probably couldn't end up being Hitler either, or a community organizer, or a New York real estate tycoon. It's not that easy or simple. None of our American presidents have ever been Hitler. But the people of Germany certainly thought FDR was a murdering dictator when B-17 started dropping bombs on them. This is why you have to know what you believe and why you believe it. Good guys and bad guys are often in the eyes of the beholder, and they often look similar in the fog of conflict. I would imagine Japanese Americans in internment camps wondered if their president was Hitler-like. Nope. Horrible act, but not even close to Hitler. To that point, ironically, the American president who could have been likened to Hitler, before Hitler, in some of his methods was, wait for it, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln broke more constitutional law than any other president in U.S. history. He imprisoned political opponents without due process. He suspended habeas corpus. He was personally responsible for the deaths of 600,000 people. He invaded countries that had declared their own sovereignty and forced them back into a union they didn't want to be a part of. He unilaterally annexed Nevada, without 60,000 residents, in order to carry it and win the 1864 election. In other words, he pretty much rigged it. And when he was killed by one of the highest paid and most famous actors of his day, ironic, don't you think, the actor screamed, "Thus always to tyrants," in Latin, because the man thought he was being a patriot for ridding the world of a dictator. But he wasn't, and he didn't. Lincoln did all of those things to end and win the Civil War, and today we love him for it, as we should, because in the end, his vision was right, even though his methods were suspect in the heat of the moment. When people think they're seeing a Hitler, they might actually, sometimes, be seeing something closer to a Churchill. Before World War II, everyone thought Churchill was the big bad wolf. His own people hated him and thought he was a Hitler-type character. Again, pre-Hitler. But he just kept saying, "Guys, I'm telling you, this Hitler guy is the real problem, not me." And he turned out to be right. There's a difference between an abrasive leader who makes you uncomfortable and a despot. Now, people are comparing Donald Trump to Hitler, and the countdown has officially begun to, well, I don't know, but something really bad. I get that someone who is combative with the press and who wants to vet refugees and shut down open immigration fits the bill some are always looking for when it comes to finally getting their Hitler villain. But if you study enough about it, you realize the guy vetting and banning refugees is probably not Hitler. The guy creating refugees probably is. If we keep looking for Hitler in every United States president we disagree with, we're not going to recognize the real one when he actually shows up in a different country.
توجه بفرمایید. البته بله